Hello everyone and welcome to this session. This is the sixth session of the series that I prepared for you about clean architecture. Today we are going to start with the task that I gave you, the challenge about completing the commands that we have for the member features, and after that we are going to do some refactoring to make this code better. Let's start with the delete member. Based on the naming convention for each of the folders that I have inside the commands, I'm going to create one request and one request handler. Then I will have two files, delete member request and delete member request handler. Let's start with the delete member request. As you can see here, I have delete member request, which is a record and accepts just one ID. And the return type for this request is unit. Unit is one specific type for mediator for the time that we are just going to return nothing or return void. Then if you have a method which is not going to return anything, you shouldn't specify iRequest of type void. You should specify iRequest of type unit. And for the handler, if I check it, we have a repository, and here in the handle method we are getting the item first from the database, and then we are going to check if the item exists, because if the item doesn't exist and is equal to null, we need to throw an exception, and this exception is from type not found exception. In the previous video we created one exception. Let me show it to you. Yes, bad request exception, but we need to have another specific exception for items that we don't find them. And if I go to the file, you will see that it is nothing special. It accepts a name and a key, and it is going to call the base with name key was not found. After doing the validation here, we are going to just await repository.delete async and delete the item and return unit.value. For the update member, we are following exactly the same naming convention. We have a folder update member and update member request. The request that I have has exactly the same properties that my domain model has, except the administrative one. And if I compare it with what I have for creating member, it is almost the same. But for the request for updating member, I need to have access to ID as well, because based on this ID, I'm going to update a record inside the database. And for handler, it is almost the same as create one. First, we need to validate. We are going to use and create this update member request validator, and then validate it async, get the validation result, and check if we have any errors in the validation results. We are going to throw an exception with the message something went wrong and just passing the dictionary result of this validation result. After checking everything, we are going to get the item based on the ID from the database, because if you want to edit something, it is better to get it from the database to have access to the latest version and then apply the changes on the properties that you want. We are checking here if the item still exists inside the database. Otherwise, we need to return not found exception, as you can see here. And for updating the item that we just get from the database, we need to assign each of the properties from request to this item. Then how to do that? I can just assign them one by one, or I can use AutoMapper. AutoMapper is a NuGet package that I can use for mapping objects together. How it works? First, you need to install this AutoMapper dependency, and after that, for mapping something, for example, for update, you need to inject it here, AutoMapper from type IMapper, and use it mapper.map request and item to edit. If I check it, it will say that the first parameter is the source, which is the request that we are receiving, and the second parameter is the destination. For updating something, it is better to use mapper.map and pass the original and source items. And finally, we are going to use repository.updateAsync to update everything and return unit.value. I just changed my code for the create member request handler, and here instead of just creating an object, I am using this mapper. We are mapping something. We are telling the mapper that I need to map this request to a domain.member type, and then it is going to create one item for me. But how AutoMapper realized that what property should be assigned to what? We have a configuration folder. I created that one. This configuration folder, it has one mapper profile, and for the mapper profile I'm going to create one class for each of the features that I have. As an example here, I have a member feature, and I'm going to create a member profile. Inside the member profile, I need to inherit from the profile class, which comes with the AutoMapper library. And then inside the constructor method, you need to map it. I created two maps, one for the update member request and the other for create member request. But keep it in mind that mapping is one way, which means that if I just check it here, it says the source for mapping is the update member request and the destination type should be member. It means that you can just map something from the type update member request to the member, to the domain member model, not vice versa. Okay, it is exactly what I want for this session. Let me check the validator that I have. The validator is exactly the same as the validator that I had for the create member. I just added another rule here for checking if the ID that I'm accepting is greater than 1, because of course if the ID is 0 or something negative, I'm not going to send a request to the database because I know that it doesn't exist. Now that we are done with the challenge that I gave you, it is time for improving the code. First of all, I'm going to find the duplicate lines that I have, for example, here for update member validation and the create member validation. It is almost the same. I'm going to use object-oriented features and inheritance to cover this one. And the second thing is I need to have some better validations. As an example, I don't want to store anything inside the database if the member is already exist. Let me go to the create member request as an example here. In the create member request, I have date of birth, email address, and first name and last name. I guess if we want to check if the user exists or not, just by first name, last name, date of birth, and email, we can realize if it is the same user or not. Or maybe we can just check the email address and date of birth. It is up to you, but I'm going to implement it for you, and then you can decide how to use it. Let's start with creating member request validator. The first thing that I need to have access to is my repository because I need to check the databases. These rules that I created are for validating the data that we are receiving, but Fluent Validator lets us to do some other validations as well. If I want to go to the database or call another API and validate the incoming result based on the answer that I'm getting from database or API, it is possible. But how? First, let's try to add my repository and mapper to this create member request. Inside the handler, I can easily pass the mapper and repository, and by pressing Ctrl dot, I can add this constructor using the fields. Okay, let's do it and check it. It created another constructor for me. It is something that I don't want. Let me just copy it and paste it here. Now it is better, and get rid of this constructor. It is fine. I have the mapper, I have the repository, and I have some fields for them. But how can I create a method which checks the database for redundant data? We need to create another rule first, and this rule is for the whole object. It is not just for one property. It is the reason that I say T for T, not T for example, postal code. And then I need to call a method, invoke a method called mustAsync. And for this mustAsync, I need to call a method, a synchronous method. Let's select a name for this method. I guess unique member is fine. And then I can say that if this rule is violated, I need you to return a message. Then for returning message, I can easily use with message and the member already exists. I don't know how to create this unique member. Then I press just control period and generate the method unique member. As easy as that. It is a private async task of type bool with the name unique member, and it is accepting create member request, exactly the type that I have here, create member request for the abstract validator, and a cancellation token. First, I need to convert this request that I have to a domain.member, and now I can pass it to my repository and check if it exists or not. Return await repository is member unique and pass the entity to it. This is member unique. This method doesn't exist in my interface. Then I need to generate it using control period, and I can generate it. If I press F12 on it, now inside the iMember repository, I have another method just for checking if this member is unique inside the database or not. The reason that I created one generic repository and one repository for each member is we have some CRUD operation which is general between all the repositories. But for each domain, we need to have some specific actions for checking something, for deleting something, or doing something that we will see during this tutorial. The first thing that I need for members is checking if the member is unique, and we don't have any member with this specific information in the database. It is one of the usages of using generic repository and inherit from generic repository and create one domain model specific repository. Okay, let's save it, save everything, and go to the infrastructure layer and persistence layer. In the persistence layer, I have a repository, I have member repository, and for member repository, I need to implement the method that I added to the interface. Let's implement the interface, and it is something like that. The code I like to write here is something like return await dbset any async. Let me just change it to async, yeah, and check if the entity, okay, I have a misspelling here, it should be entity, good. If the entity first name, last name, postal code, and date of birth exist in the database or not. Okay, let's change postal code to the email and check it based the email, first name, last name, and date of birth. And it is comparing the result of any. Any is a method from the entity framework which, if something exists with the criteria that we specified for it, it is going to return true. We are checking if this one exists or not. Let's get rid of this false and just return the any because it can be more understandable for me. And let's go back to the generic repository that I have because I changed something else. These two, context and DB sets, were private when I created this file, but I need to change them to protected because in the classes which are inherited from the generic repository like member repository, we need to have access to this DB set and context. In my example here, I use dbset because I haven't saved anything. But if I want to call the save change method, I need to have access to _db context field that I created in the base class. Let's go back to the create member request validator. And as you can see here, we are checking if there is any, and I'm going to compare it to something else, to maybe false here, or you can do it inside your repository. It really depends on you. Is the member unique? As the name suggests, it should return true if there is no any item like that. But here in the implementation, we are returning true if an item exists. Then we need to use equal false again. I'm not sure why I deleted that one, but if the name suggests that is member unique, you should return true when the output of any is false. Okay, and I don't need to add it here as well. I'm not sure why I did that, but it is good thing to do it. And the next thing that I want to do is to use inheritance and get rid of all these repeated conditions and rules that I have for creating and updating members. Let's build the code and be sure that there is no error here. And I need to create a folder. Let's call it underscore share. I'm putting an underscore behind the name because I want it to be the first thing, first folder in my feature. Yeah, I placed it under the feature, under the command, and now I'm going to create one base validator or base command validator. We don't have any kind of naming convention for it, but if you are going to follow a naming convention like member base validation or base member validation, you need to follow exactly the same naming convention for the rest of the shared validator that you have. Let's create a file. I'm going to create a file and I like to name it something like base member request validator. And this base member request validator should inherit from the abstract validator class, and this abstract validator accepts one type. But what type should I pass to it? If I pass this create member request, I can use this base member validator, base member request validator just for creating, and if I want to use it for update, I need to pass update to it. Then it is time to create another class. I'm going to create one base class for this request that I have, and I'm going to call it base member request. In this base member request, which is a public class, I will move all the properties that I have inside the create member request as the first action. Okay, fine. And now I'm going to inherit the create member request from this type because we are using iRequest as the flag for the mediator. I can inherit this class from another class and get rid of these properties. Fine. And if I go to the update member request again, I can get rid of the redundant properties and inherit from the base class, which in my case is base member request. The only property that I have in update member request, which I didn't have in the create member request, is ID. And fine. Now inside the validator, I can say that I'm going to validate the base member request, and I should create a constructor. And validations, I can just copy them all and paste them here. I'm going to use all this validation here except this one, unique member, because finding a unique member for the time that you are creating a member and updating a member is different. I'm going to save it for now, going back to the create member validator and remove these rules. Let's do exactly the same thing for the update, but before doing that, I need to inherit from this base member request validator. Multi-level inheritance in C# is forbidden. You cannot do that. Then how can I do that? How can I inherit from a class that I created? Because you need to inherit from the abstract validator. The Fluent Validator developers created another method for you, which is called include. Using include, you can specify another class which is inherited from this abstract validator. And all the rules in that class were checked first, and then the rest of the rules here will get executed. Then it is as easy as that. I need to copy this include and go to the update member request as well and paste it here. Let's recap what we talked about today. Today we talked about how to create all the commands that we have and how to enhance our validation model. And we refactored our code and move all the duplicate codes to one base class. You need to be careful with extracting all the duplicate codes to the base class, because in some cases, if you think that in future you are not going to touch it, even if you type the code in two different places, just leave it as it is. But for the rules, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm going to add another rule which should be applied for both creation and updating operations, or maybe from the base member request. I'm not sure. Maybe in future we are going to add another property to the model, and if I add another property to model for updating and creating, I need to add it here as well. Then before creating base classes, think carefully about it. And your task and your challenge for the next session is to create the queries, get all members and get members details. In the next video, we are going to complete the member feature and make this whole application ready for run. We don't have any dependency injection, we don't have any database migration, and even we haven't seeded anything to our database. In the next video, we are going to work on them. Then do not miss it. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. And by hitting the bell, you will get notified when I upload a new video. Enjoy your life as a developer and keep practicing.